October 7th, 2023. California's governor signs one climate law, and more than 5,000 corporations, Cargill, Tyson, and Smithfield, must now report every emission across their entire supply chains. Every gallon of diesel burned in Iowa, every pound of fertilizer spread in Kansas, becomes California's business. Satellites are already watching. Scope 3 filings are due by 2027, and most farmers caught in this net have no idea what's coming. On October 7th, 2023, California signed Senate Bill 253 into law, instantly binding more than 5,000 of the nation's largest companies to its climate rules. Any business with at least $1 billion in annual revenue, and even a single sale or contract in California, is now legally required to report greenhouse gas emissions. The law's reach is sweeping, and Cargill, Archer Daniels Midland, Tyson Foods, Smithfield, Louis Dreyfus, Bunge, and JBS are all named among those caught in the net. These firms, each with a physical or contractual foothold in California, now face a mandate that extends far beyond state lines. Senate Bill 253's requirements are explicit. Companies must account for emissions, not just from their own operations, but across their entire value chain. For agribusiness giants, this means tracking fuel burned by combines in Nebraska, fertilizer spread in Kansas, and feed mixed for cattle in Iowa. The California Air Resources Board enforces compliance with civil penalties up to $500,000 per year and daily fines after a 30-day grace period. Repeat violations threaten a company's right to do business in the state. This is a mandate that reaches to the farm gate. The numbers are staggering. Cargill reported $134 billion in revenue for 2024. Archer Daniels Midland reported $64 billion. Tyson Foods reported $48 billion. Over 5,200 companies now fall under the statute. California's $3.9 trillion economy, the fifth largest in the world, makes compliance non-negotiable. The burden does not stop at the corporate office. Farmers in the Midwest, far from Sacramento, now receive emissions questionnaires from buyers racing to meet California's deadlines. Scope 1 and Scope 2 reports are due by August 10th, 2026. Scope 3 reports are due by April 30th, 2027. Every link in the supply chain is now measured. Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 are the pillars of California's new emissions reporting regime, each carrying a different weight for companies and the farmers who supply them. Scope 1 covers direct emissions from company-owned sources, like the diesel burned in a processor's own truck fleet. Scope 2 tracks the emissions from purchased electricity or heating, indirect but still within the company's operational control. The real hammer, though, is Scope 3. It is the main event, covering all other indirect emissions up and down the value chain, from the fertilizer spread on Kansas wheat fields to the feed mixed for Iowa cattle. For agribusiness giants, Scope 3 is not a footnote. It accounts for roughly 90% of total emissions at firms like Cargill and ADM. This is why California's law zeroes in on the farm ledger, turning every gallon of diesel, every pound of nitrogen, every mile a crop travels into a data point for state regulators. The California Air Resources Board has set hard deadlines. August 10th, 2026 for Scope 1 and Scope 2 disclosures, and April 30th, 2027 for the first Scope 3 reports. These timelines force companies to push data demands down the supply chain well before the ink is dry on the regulations. For the average farmer, this means fielding granular supplier questionnaires, requests for fuel logs, fertilizer invoices, crop yields, and transport distances. It is not just about averages or estimates. The law, modeled on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, requires supplier-specific data wherever possible. If a farmer cannot provide it, the company must substitute default emission factors, often much higher, raising the risk of being labeled a high emitter and losing preferred market access. The sheer scope of these demands explains why surveillance technology is moving from the boardroom to the back 40. Satellite monitoring, GPS-linked field records, and digital traceability platforms are no longer optional. They are the infrastructure that makes compliance possible. In the end, the farmer's ledger, once a private tool for managing the bottom line, becomes evidence in a regulatory file. Its numbers scrutinized not just by buyers, but by California's bureaucrats, thousands of miles from the nearest field. Satellites now sweep over the Midwest's patchwork of fields with a regularity once reserved for military operations. Every 48 hours, Global Forest Watch overlays update with new imagery, flagging the faintest trace of land conversion or forest loss. Cargill and other agribusiness giants have integrated these feeds into their compliance dashboards, using machine learning to scan millions of acres for changes that could trigger emissions inquiries. In 2025, Cargill's system began sending deforestation alerts to its supply chain within 2 days of a detected event, well ahead of any legal deadline. Satelligence, a Dutch startup, delivers crop type identification and yield estimates through its API, assigning risk scores to individual farm parcels in Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska. These scores feed directly into buyers' carbon accounting software, mapping every shipment of soy or corn to a specific field polygon. The surveillance is not theoretical or on hold for 2027. It is active now, with United States rollout underway. For farmers, the sky has become a silent auditor, recording every acre, every rotation, every hint of change, long before any state inspector sets foot on the ground. Tract, a traceability startup backed by $21.6 million in Series A funding as of October 2025, has become the new digital gatekeeper between farm fields and corporate climate ledgers. Its platform does not just collect data, it transforms every step of farm activity into a stream of carbon numbers, ready to be uploaded into the compliance dashboards of Cargill, Tyson, and ADM. The system reaches down to the parcel level, assigning each field a unique identifier and requiring farmers to input granular details: gallons of diesel used, pounds of fertilizer applied, yield per acre, and transport miles. Tract's API connects directly with buyers' supply chain software, feeding live emissions estimates into corporate reports destined for California regulators. The terms of service often assign data ownership not to the farmer, but to the corporate client. Farmers can view or export their raw records, but the aggregated data, now classified, scored, and benchmarked, belongs to the buyer. The supplier questionnaire engine automates the process, generating the exact fields required by Senate Bill 253 for each contract. Refusal to participate can mean exclusion from preferred markets, as buyers increasingly write traceability compliance into purchase agreements. For independent producers, the app is not just a tool, it is an ultimatum, linking operational transparency to continued access in a market now governed by California's climate bureaucracy. The digital pipeline is in place, and with it, a new era of surveillance-driven agriculture. The grain market in the United States is dominated by a handful of giants. ADM, Cargill, and Bunge together control about 65% of all corn and soybean processing. Their contracts are no longer just about price or delivery terms. They now hinge on a farmer's ability to supply emissions data that meets California's standards. For thousands of independent producers in Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas, the message is clear. Without a verified carbon ledger, the buyer may simply walk away. This is not a theoretical risk. Preferred supplier lists are being rewritten to require real-time traceability and Scope 3 compliance as a condition of sale. A farmer who cannot or will not fill out the emissions questionnaire, link their fields to a digital platform, or upload fuel and fertilizer logs is at risk of losing their contract altogether. With so much market share concentrated in the hands of a few buyers, the choice is stark. Adopt the new surveillance-driven protocols, or be locked out of the largest outlets for your crops. The voluntary era of sustainability data is over. For most, compliance is now the price of entry. A 150-acre corn farm in Iowa brings in around $300,000 in annual receipts. After seed, fertilizer, fuel, and loan payments, the farmer clears just 10 to 15% as net profit, often less in a tough year. Now, the cost to comply with California's Scope 3 data demands lands like a second mortgage. The USDA pilot program put the annual tab at $17,600 per farm, $2,250 for software, $1,800 for GPS data plans, over $8,000 for third-party verification, and thousands more for consultant fees and sensor hardware. That single line item wipes out roughly 60% of the farm's net earnings. On paper, it's just compliance. In reality, it's a bill that dwarfs any other line on the ledger, imposed by a state office 3 time zones away. For many, it's the difference between staying afloat and going under. On January 9, 2026, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals convened to hear arguments in what many called the most consequential climate regulation case in years. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, joined by major agribusiness interests, challenged California's Senate Bill 253 and Senate Bill 261, arguing the laws force companies to disclose proprietary supply chain data and unlawfully extend California's authority across state lines. At the heart of the case is the Pike versus Bruce Church balancing test, a Supreme Court doctrine that weighs a state's interest against burdens placed on interstate commerce. California's $3.9 trillion economy gives it unmatched leverage, but the chamber contends that mandatory Scope 3 reporting imposes excessive costs and compels speech from out-of-state actors. Judges pressed both sides on whether a disclosure law, rather than a direct production mandate, crosses constitutional lines. With Scope 1 and Scope 2 reports due by August 2026, and Scope 3 filings set for April 2027, companies and farmers face a regulatory clock that will not wait for the courts. The outcome remains uncertain, with the legal and economic stakes only rising as deadlines approach. New York, Washington, and Massachusetts are now drafting their own versions of climate disclosure laws, some with revenue thresholds as low as $500 million. If these bills pass, the same surveillance and reporting demands could sweep across the country, tightening the compliance vice on farmers from coast to coast. The fight over emissions data is no longer just a California issue. It threatens to redraw the boundaries of food production and rural autonomy nationwide. California's $1 billion threshold now dictates how grain is grown in Nebraska, how cattle are fed in Texas, and which farms survive nationwide. As 2026 looms, one state's climate mandate is reshaping American agriculture, raising urgent questions about power, privacy, and who controls the nation's food supply.